Welcome back. The Bill Kelly Show, 980 CFPL London, 900 CHML in Hamilton. On Election Day here in the province of Ontario, you've got till 8 o'clock tonight to vote, and take a few minutes and be part of the democratic process here. The race in Hamilton has been rather interesting for a whole lot of reasons. The mayoral race, of course, especially because, well, there's no incumbent. Fred Eisenberger decided not to run for re-election, and it's an open seat. And it's been an interesting race. A number of people, of course, have registered to run in the mayor's position. The consensus seems to be the top three being Andrea Horwath, Keenan Loomis, and Bob Bertina. Here's a little montage of what some of those mayoral hopefuls had to say over the last couple of weeks of the campaign.
What I'm hearing from people everywhere I go, all kinds of different people, is a real concern about the cost of housing.
Working on bringing truth, trust, and transparency back to City Hall.
My message is getting out the way I'm hearing back from people, and that they accept my message.
Those are the three main contenders for this, and as we said, we'll have the election coverage actually starting at 6 o'clock tonight. Scott Riley will be broadcasting from Hamilton City Hall, and then we'll pick up the ball at 8 o'clock, and that's when the polls close, and some of the results will be pouring in. Municipal election's pretty good about getting the vote out there as quickly as possible, too. Joining us later on tonight, too, to give his perspective on this will be John Best. John, of course, is the publisher of the Bay Observer, and he joins us right now to give us an assessment on what he's heard and seen so far. John, thanks so much for the time. It's good to have you with us again this morning.
Good to be with you, Bill.
Notwithstanding some of the comments from some of the mayoral candidates here, but they want to be transparent and you know, have a clean race, etc. It got a little testy in the last couple of weeks of this campaign, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. Really, right from the beginning, there was, when Keenan Loomis was out of the gate first, and he's had a very energetic campaign, and he made it very clear that he wanted to be, the change candidate, and he was fairly disparaging, I think, of his two opponents in terms of using phrases like recycled politicians and so on. I wrote an article on that where I made the point that running for mayor of Hamilton is perhaps the only job where experience is a deficit or a negative. There's no other job I can think of where having no experience puts you is an advantage, but that's the way the narrative has gone in Hamilton.
Surprisingly, and others before Keenan Loomis ran this time around. I mean, there are others that have been saying, "I'm an outsider," that I'm the one that should be there, and I get that attitude because let's face it, there seems to be a common thread here that a lot of people just don't like politicians and they don't trust politicians, and if they pass a bylaw or something that they don't like, they hate them even more. So if you've got a track record, you're going to have some problems trying to defend that track record, but that's the game, isn't it?
It really is, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we don't need change. We do need change, and given the number of vacancies, both on council and with the open mayoralty race, we're going to get change. It'll be interesting to see who fills these slots, and so I think a balanced council is one where you have a good number of new faces, but also a decent number of people with experience who can, in some ways be a little bit of provide some mentorship to the new members. Because a lot of the things that are being promised by both mayoralty and council candidates are absolutely impossible to deliver under our structure. The one thing we do have control over is policing, and so when Bertina talks about adding more police, that's something the Police Services Board can do. But attacking affordability of housing, that's a national problem, and it's going to require all three levels of government. Certainly the municipality can play a role, but the reality is that it's already been announced last week that municipalities might as well shut down their planning departments because the province is taking that over. The builders will be able, maybe just go to an automated vending machine now to get their building permits, because it's very clear that planning is going to be significantly weakened at the municipal level. So,
Well, and I've seen that. I mean, from my time on council some years ago, but I mean, even talking to councilors that have served over the last little while, I was always the 9.5 years I was on council. I was always on the planning committee, and I enjoyed that work because it's basically determining how the city is going to grow and where it's going to grow. But you're absolutely right. Part of that process was always a public meeting, at least one, where the neighborhood would have an opportunity to weigh in on this. Hey, I think it's a bad idea, good idea, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty much going to be right off the table now. I mean, you could wake up one morning and find out they're building a duplex or a triplex right across the road from you, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it.
exactly, and it's gonna be an interesting change. Now, people will argue that going right back to the old Ontario Municipal Board, that even that body always had a bit of a developer tilt to it. But certainly now it's gone through all these name iterations. But this Ontario Land Tribunal and the statements from the Minister Clark last week clearly indicate that NIMBY is simply going to be ruled out of order, and we're going to see a different complexion to our cities in the next coming decade, I suppose. You are going to see more multiple housing in neighborhoods where it's pretty much all single family, and we'll just see what that translates into in terms of how the voters react.
Well, they'll react by calling their counselor and say, "What's going on here?" And their hands are going to be tied in a lot of these situations. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens. You talked about campaign promises, though, John, and at the risk of sounding overly cynical. Especially in this campaign, I've noticed, not just from the mayor's race, but even the council races as well. Invariably, this boils down to the councilors or candidates, I guess, in this particular case, telling people what they want to hear, as opposed to some viable alternatives. Like you say, I mean, I don't know anybody that's ever run for public office that says, I want to get your taxes down. Well, you actually have very little control over that these days, too. I mean, nobody wants to admit that when they're running for office, but once you're faced with that reality, a tax decrease is something everybody would like to hear, and the reality of it happening, of course, is, well, two chances, I guess, slim and none, given the situation and the financial situation of this and just about every other city in Ontario is facing.
I think it's going to be a shock to some of the new councillors, especially those who are focused on identity politics. The municipal level is not really the best place to practice that kind of social warfare. You're better to run for the federal parliament, where you can get up and talk about Palestine or intersectionality or whatever you want. Nobody cares. At the municipal level, you're really a caretaker in many ways. You certainly can have influence in social issues and identity issues, but if you think that's going to be the main job that you're going to be doing, you're going to be in for a disappointment and possibly a one-term on council. So, the job has got a lot of nuts and bolts to it. And the first thing they're going to face, this new council, is this whopping almost 7% increase that Mike Zegarac, the treasurer, is talking about. And, now we always go through this dance every year where it gets whittled down to 2.5. But this year, it sounds like some of those tools and capabilities are not going to be there. For one thing, the COVID money, the windfall COVID money that municipalities got is gone. It's not going to be renewed. So it's going to be a very challenging year for this new council.
Yeah, and it's a rather daunting process, and especially for newcomers, to be faced with this. The binders and binders of financial statements, et cetera. And I'm not suggesting that them that have done it for a long time are better at it, because sometimes that's not the case at all. But it's going to be a rather interesting and a rather, I think, blunt baptism for an awful lot of these new people that are going to be on council. 7 of them, including the mayor's office, of course, are going to be newbies. And I can't think of a time when we've had that much of a turnover on a council. I mean, 1997, I think there were 5 new faces on that council out of 16 in the old city back in those days, the 8 wards. But this is going to be, 7 at least. And I guess when we say that number, John, we're pretty much assuming that the incumbents that are running are probably going to get reelected.
Yes, and I think some of them are going to have very tight races. So the number of new faces could be greater than 7. I think the other thing, when you have a council with a lot of new faces, and I don't want to draw a false conflict here between staff and the councilors, but the more new faces you have, the easier it is for staff to do stuff, without being perhaps challenged. And we have a situation now, Bill, with the Red Hill inquiry, which a number of people rather foolishly, I think, want to blame on council. What I take away from that Red Hill inquiry is how council was manipulated, how they were ignored, how they were kept in the dark. And that's just one issue. Are there other issues where council is handled, if you will, in such a way? So, there's it's going to be, the more new faces you have, the more likelihood something like that can happen, because you don't have some of the older watchdog types who know where the where the skeletons are buried.
Let me ask you about that, because you're right. There's going to be a very sharp learning curve for the newcomers, including whoever is going to be the mayor. There are some people there with political experience running for that job, but none of them have been one's been the mayor before, but
Sure.
We'll see what's going to happen after that. But what about that relationship between staff and council? It was rather acrimonious for a long time. Some of the councilors who made it so are not running for re-election this time around. Does that mean there will be peace in the valley?
Well, there may be peace. I mean, we've had, the last term, other than, the one counselor who will go nameless at this point because he's not running. But most of I think the tone and the decorum of council was relatively polite. There was nowhere near the crosstalk we used to see for years and years. And certainly when on your time on council, Bill, it was a pretty wild and woolly place. But I think behind the scenes, there's a concern that maybe the pendulum towards politeness has swung too far, and there has to be a balance between proper oversight, a rigorous oversight, and just letting the inmates run the zoo. So it's going to be challenging, I think.
Email here, bkelly@900chml.com from Alexa says, I, for one, don't want to see the top job go to somebody with zero experience in any elected position and whose experience does not equip him or her to appreciate the demands of the job. I've never understood why one of the mayoral candidates didn't first cut his chops in a council position, learn how to get things done before trying to run the whole place. I don't want a mayor who needs to learn not only about being head of council or a mayor in a huge city, but learn about relationship with other levels of government. That's a rather long note here from Alexa. Basically, I think you got an idea who she's not going to vote for in a situation like that. But it raises a point here. But it raises an interesting point here, John. And I mentioned this in my commentary of CHML earlier this morning. And we've always said, well, the mayor really, when it comes down to it, is just one vote on council for now. But Premier Ford indicated last week in a speech he was making that he's going to extend the strong mayor powers about a year from now, and Hamilton's on that list. So whomever takes that job over is going to assume those powers, and that means they can hire and fire staff, except for chiefs of police and things of that nature. And they're going to control the budget that's going to be presented to council too. There's a lot of responsibility there, and I think people have to keep that in mind. I mean, who we're electing right now is going to be all of a sudden be the recipient of all of this, and it can be overwhelming for a veteran mayor for a lot of us. But it's I guess something we have to keep in mind as voters right now is who can handle this and who's going to be able to use those powers and not be overwhelmed by them.
Well, they're definitely going to put bullets in the gun of some of these mayors, and some will use their powers wisely and some not wisely. I mean, we've already seen in Brampton where Patrick Brown is running for re-election. He's in trouble because even without the strong mayor powers, he got a bunch of cronies that were totally discredited in Niagara, and gave them all key positions in in Brampton, and these are people that were written up by the St. Catharines Standard, a tremendous scandal about how they were all sort of feathering each other's nests, and there was a cabal, and why Patrick Brown transferred all of those discredited people to his municipality is beyond me, but it's causing him some real pain. He's facing a council that has basically been in revolt with him for the last couple of years. So add to that strong mayor powers. I see mischief if somebody doesn't have the character to use those powers wisely.
Well, yeah, I mean, there can be people that just aren't up to the job, and they're going to be overwhelmed by that. And as you say, there's always the possibility, and I'm not suggesting any of the candidates would do this, and because time will tell how things are going to go. But you can use that or abuse that power, and it's something that I think we have to keep in mind. There are people right now working at City Hall in the administration, in various departments, managers of various departments. There's the city manager. According to what the legislation that the Premier's talking about right now, a year from now here in Hamilton, and certainly right after this election in places like Toronto and Ottawa, the mayor can hire and fire those people. Just say, I don't like you, you're gone. I want to put my person in there like Patrick Brown did in Brampton. And you have to be concerned about that too. I mean, you mentioned how could a guy like Brown do that? Because he could. And sometimes that's what politicians do, and that's why they do it, because they can. They want their people there so they can move their agenda forward. And I think we need to be wary of that.
Yeah, and in that case, I think it also suggests either a weak council or a council that wasn't paying attention, and because anybody that was reading a Southern Ontario newspaper knew that some of those people that he hired had been in trouble in Niagara. So anyway, that's another municipality, but I think it's an illustration of if you get the wrong kind of people wielding too much power and lack of oversight, that you can get some real problems.
So we'll get into this in further detail, of course, later on tonight after the polls close, and we'll start looking at some of the results here. Are any of the incumbents that are running, are any of them in trouble?
Well, I'm hearing that the race in Ward 13 with Arlene Vanderbeek is getting close. If you look at signs, you wonder about Ward 3, where Walter Furlan is running against Narinder Nan, and it certainly looks like it's going to be an interesting race. Mind you, signs don't vote, but if you look at the signs, I mean, he's got a ton of signs up all over the place, so at least the people that own those properties are probably going to vote for him. Not sure about what's happening in Stony Creek, both races. There seems to be some challenges underway. Maria Pearson is facing the same two people she ran against last time, and maybe that's good for her in the sense that maybe the two opponents will split the vote and she'll get in. But there's some real spirited races involving incumbents, and that's something that we haven't seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, and I mean, notwithstanding the comments of one of the mayoral candidates that we don't want recycled politicians. I think you may see them, and there's a former mayor of Flamborough is running for that council seat, Ted McMeekin, who was in provincial politics for the longest time. I've heard that he's got a pretty good shot at that. Scott Lavelle. Go ahead.
He was the mayor of Flamborough. He's very well known out there, even though he ended up living in Dundas. But yeah, I think he's got a good shot. Keenan Loomis wants to make him housing czar. That's another area where we will find out very quickly that that's a council decision. And so. But I think you're right. I think Ted is certainly the best known of the candidates in that group, and for some reason, even though he's had more time in elective office than either Bob Bratina or Andrea Horvath, somehow he's escaping the recycled politician moniker.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, interesting. Mr. Loomis doesn't like recycled politicians, but I guess he likes that one. So we'll see what happens with that. And as I say, you're going to have to draw a line at some point about what council can do and what the mayor can do. It's going to be an interesting night, John. Look forward to joining you at 8 o'clock tonight, and we'll have a discussion, an in-depth discussion about who's going to be making those decisions. But thanks so much for this today.
You bet, Bill.